So last weekend at nearly 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, Senate Republicans were scrambling to pass their nearly 500-page tax reform plan, and they were in such a rush to pass this bill and vote on it that they literally included handwritten amendments in the margins of the bill. Now, they did end up passing this legislation in a 51-49 vote, with all but one Republican voting in favor of this legislation, and surprisingly, no Democrats voting with Republicans. Now, of course, as you could have guessed, as soon as President Donald Trump got word that the bill passed the Senate, he was elated and immediately bragged about it at the first opportunity he got.
So last night at about 3 in the morning, I got a call. I said, call me. You can call me. It's the largest tax decrease in the history of our country by far. It's not even close. I said, we have to use the word tax cuts. Now, if you want to throw reform, you could say tax cuts and reform. But you have to use the word cut because people don't know what reform means. Reform could mean your taxes are going up. In fact, a lot of people thought that. So for years, 30 years, 31 years, they've been using the word reform. So we use the word tax cuts. And last night, out of 52 Republican senators, 51 voted. The Democrats left before the vote was even, somebody said started, somebody said before it was over. I don't even care. But we got no Democrat help, and I think that's going to cost them very big in the election.
Actually, they didn't just vote on tax cuts specifically for the wealthy, but they also voted to increase taxes on most Americans. That includes the middle and lower classes. Now, what I find hilarious here is that Donald Trump actually implied in that clip that it's misleading to refer to this bill as tax reform, because really what this is about is tax cuts. But in actuality, he's completely wrong, because even though it is true that this bill does cut taxes, 80% of those tax cuts go to the richest 1% of Americans in the country, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. But I mean, maybe since Republicans were in such a rush to vote on this legislation, they didn't know that, because as the New York Times reports, even hours after the Senate vote, tax experts were scratching their heads over precisely what had made it into the final version of the bill and the impact of some significant provisions. But now we actually know specifically what this legislation entails, and contrary to what Donald Trump wants us to believe, this isn't just a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans in the country. This is a substantial increase on the middle class, and you don't have to dig very deep in this bill to determine that that is actually the case. But when it comes to the giveaway to the rich, well, for all of you private jet owners watching this, you'll probably be happy to know that Republicans are actually offering you some much needed tax relief. That's right, this bill literally includes a tax cut for private jet owners, and also the New York Times reports that there's a subsidy for private and religious schools, if you want to even call them that. And additionally, they didn't end up closing many tax loopholes like they promised to do. Surprise, surprise. So much for simplifying the tax code, right? But Ryan Grimm of The Intercept lays out specifically what rich people will be getting as a result of this bill if it is in fact codified into law. A full $1.5 trillion alone is going to slash the corporate tax rate, and CEOs have said repeatedly they plan to pocket that money rather than invest it or give workers higher wages. The alternative minimum tax, paid almost exclusively by the rich, is also eliminated. That's a $700 billion giveaway. Another $150 billion goes to repealing the estate tax, which currently exempts the first 11 million of the deceased's estate, so nobody even remotely middle class pays it. The repeal benefits so few people, you can practically list them out. More than $200 billion in cuts goes to a provision that allows a greater deduction for dividends on foreign earnings. That's not for you. Roughly $600 billion goes to reducing taxes on pass-throughs and other businesses not set up as corporations, which law firms, lobby shops, and doctors' offices often benefit from. Poor and middle-class people do not tend to set themselves up as pass-throughs. Under current law, many tax credits phase out at low-income thresholds. The GOP plan changes that by raising the threshold so richer people can also claim the credit. That provision alone is by definition a $200 billion tax cut for the wealthy. Individual and family tax rates are cut by about $1 trillion, and some regular people will indeed see some of that money as a tax cut, but not much. As the New York Times noted, by 2027, people making between $40,000 and $50,000 would see a combined increase of $5.3 billion in taxes. Where would that money go? Folks earning more than $1 million would see their taxes collectively cut by $5.8 billion a year. Now that all amounts to trillions of dollars in tax cuts for the wealthy. And of course, this begs the question, how are they going to pay for that? Because whenever we push for policies like Medicare for all and tuition-free public colleges and universities, well, we're always asked how we're going to pay for it. So we're turning that question around and we're asking Republicans, how are you going to pay for tax cuts to the wealthy? And that actually is a question that has a very simple answer. They're going to pay for it by raising taxes on you, and this is how they're going to do it specifically. The bill raises $1.6 trillion by repealing the personal exemption everybody gets on their tax returns. It raises another $1.3 trillion by going after deductions for state and local taxes, mortgage interest, charitable donations, interest on student loans, medical expenses, teachers' out-of-pocket expenses for paper and pencils for students, and a bunch of other nickel and diming of the middle class. The plan gradually raises $128 billion in taxes by changing the way inflation is tabulated so that your taxes slowly creep up over the years as the brackets come down. And then, of course, the plan adds about $1.5 trillion to the debt over 10 years. That gets you most of the way to $6 trillion, with a handful of smaller tax hikes thrown in, some of which won't obviously hurt the middle class. The domestic production deduction, a $96 billion boondoggle, is repealed, for instance, and $54 billion is saved by ending the credit for testing cures for rare diseases. And understand that these are the more general ways in which the middle class's taxes will go up in order to pay for tax cuts to the richest Americans in the country. But when you really dive into the specifics, you begin to see how they're trying to squeeze every dollar they possibly can out of the poor and the middle class to make sure that these tax cuts to the rich are in fact paid for. So for example, as the New York Times reports, the Senate moved to tighten deductions for lower and middle income wage earners. The bill, for example, prohibits employers from rewarding employees with gift cards so that a reward of, say, $25 or $50 in the form of a gift card doesn't escape being taxed. So if you work at a retail chain, for example, and that company wants to offer you a gift card at a company picnic and offer it off, for raffles, or if they want to give it to their employees during the holiday time so they can buy a turkey for their family at Safeway, for example, well, Republicans are making sure that that doesn't happen anymore because they're not able to tax those gift cards. So they want to make sure that they can tax every single dollar that middle and low income wage earners make. And again, this is just one of the many ways in which they are trying to drain every dollar out of the poor. They're literally preventing employers from giving their employees gift cards because they don't have a way of taxing that. So when they talk about being the party of tax cuts, when they lambast Bernie Sanders as a socialist because he wants to raise everyone's taxes, that's all projection because this bill is the largest increase ever. And that's a fact. So in the end, this, of course, is a tax scam. Hence why people refer to it as the GOP tax scam. Because it is. They're telling you it's one thing. They're saying that this is a tax cut for everyone, when in actuality, that's not the case. Now, make no mistake about it. There are some benefits here for the middle class, like they are doubling the standard deduction, but in the end, that means nothing because they're still going to be raising taxes and doing away with other deductions for middle and low income wage earners in the end. So this is nothing more than a giveaway to the rich, and it's also simultaneously theft. They are stealing from the middle and lower classes in order to give that money to the rich. What this is socialism. It's reverse socialism, where instead of taking from everyone and the wealthiest Americans in order to spread that wealth around, they're taking from the lowest Americans and they're trying to put that money in the hands of the richest 1% of the country. And it's the biggest scam that we may see in our lifetimes if this does actually pass, but all signs point to this being codified into law, and I would probably guess that if it is going to pass, Donald Trump will most likely be signing this before the end of the year. So we're all going to be hurting because they want to give more tax breaks to their donors. That's what this is about, taking from the poor and giving it to the rich, the people in the country that already have everything. That's what this party is about. That's who they represent. They don't care about you. They only care about appeasing the rich in this country, who also happen to be their donors.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.